Are the LSU coaches working for Ole Miss done working for Ole Miss? I got to fill you in. It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. So the transfer portal is open. I am here actually in fabulous Las Vegas, but still working for you here because the first day of the portal was eventful, and not just from a player entering and targeting standpoint, but also from an LSU coaching perspective. So let me fill you in on what was the gigantic coaching news on Friday. Of course, we know that Ole Miss upset Georgia in the college football playoff quarterfinals on Thursday night in the Sugar Bowl. As a result, Ole Miss advances to the college football playoff semifinal on Thursday against Miami in the Fiesta Bowl. As of now, there have been a half dozen LSU coaches who've been pulling double duty, going back and forth from Oxford and Baton Rouge, helping LSU get ready for this portal cycle, but also working to get Ole Miss ready for the college football playoff. You know all of that by this point. Well, ultimately, I was told on New Year's Day that, and the exact way that it was phrased to me, was that this current system right now, this current situation of the LSU coaches going back and forth and taking time away from LSU, continuing for much longer, was, quote, not realistic. That was one highly placed source that told me that on New Year's morning, that this was not realistic. Now, this was before Ole Miss and Georgia played. And so the expectation for a lot of people was that Ole Miss was going to lose this football game. And I think, candidly, if you asked Lane Kiffin, inject truth serum, sit him up, hook him up to a lie detector, I don't think whenever they agreed to all of this, his thought was that Ole Miss would have won 2 college football playoff games. I think we all thought they'd beat Tulane. But advancing beyond Georgia to the semifinal, I don't think that this was on many people's radar. And so the thought was, okay, they'll probably lose on New Year's Day. And then the next day when the portal opens, all these coaches are back full-time at LSU. Well, now the portal is open, and Ole Miss has to get ready for a game on Thursday against Miami. So these coaches, by the way, I did report this over at LouisianaSports.net, and I tweeted it on Friday morning, that early Friday morning, Charlie Weis was back at LSU. So think of this. This was less than 12 hours after the Sugar Bowl ended. So Sugar Bowl ends, and Charlie Weis, instead of going out in New Orleans, celebrating with the team, going back to Oxford, the Sugar Bowl ends, and then he's right to Baton Rouge to start working because the portal's open. I mean, the portal opened at 11 p.m. Central Time on New Year's night. So Weis was at football ops on Friday morning. I later was able to confirm that all the assistants, Joe Cox, Kevin Smith, George McDonald, Sawyer Jordan, Dane Stevens, all of them, the 6 assistants that have been going back and forth. The 7th, by the way, is a Savage, the strength and conditioning coordinator, but he's been at LSU really for the last month. But the 6 that have been going back and forth were all at LSU football ops on Friday. They needed to be, because you're at this point right now where, look, the most important part of how Lane Kiffin is building his roster is through the transfer portal. And again, this doesn't need to be a thing where you and I debate the merits of this approach. We just have to accept the fact that this is what Lane Kiffin is doing. And I was told that the number of portal players they may actually sign in this class is going to go north of 30. Remember, Ole Miss in the last 4 years signed 20, 23, 26, and then 30. This year they signed 30 players on this Ole Miss roster that's in the college football playoff semifinal. LSU signed 14 high school prospects in the December signing period. 14. You're going to lose more than 20 seniors who are out of eligibility. You've got roughly 20 players that are already in the transfer portal. So you're talking about half your roster gutted right there, and you only brought in 14 14 high school signees. So they are going to go heavy in the transfer portal, probably north of 30 players. And so Lane Kiffin wants his staff there. He wants his staff there to recruit, to make calls, to be on the phone, to talk to these prospects who they're targeting, to go through all the evals and to make decisions. He wants his staff there. That's why he hired this staff. He doesn't want them working in Oxford for a rival. So the other part of this that's very interesting is it's not just coming from Lane Kiffin, who's saying, like, I want my coaches here. From the Ole Miss side of things, this has gotten kind of awkward as well. Now, Ross Dellinger, who does an awesome job and works for Yahoo, spoke to Ole Miss athletic director Keith Carter on the field after the Sugar Bowl on New Year's night about those coaches going back. And he asked point blank if they would coach in the college football playoff semifinal. And Keith Carter told him, we'll see. We're going to celebrate this and we'll move on to Miami after that. So y'all to the Fiesta Bowl after that. So basically a nondescript, very non-committal answer from the Ole Miss athletic director about if those coaches were going to be back. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is playing out the way it is. Remember, Ross Dellinger also reported last week that Ole Miss was considering and compiling tampering allegations against LSU. And that's something that I've reported as well at Louisiana Sports Net, that I've confirmed from sources both at LSU and at Ole Miss, that Ole Miss is compiling a comprehensive file where they are going to allege that Lane Kiffin and members of the staff were having conversations with Ole Miss players while Kiffin was still the Ole Miss coach about joining him at LSU. Now, I want to be very clear before I say another word. I haven't seen any of the evidence firsthand. I don't know if that happened. I am not accusing. I am not condemning. I am not doing anything of the sort. I am just relaying information I've been told to you that has been expressed to me from sources at both Ole Miss and at LSU, that this is going to be a comprehensive thing with calls and texts and timestamps and all different types of stuff where Ole Miss is going to allege that Lane Kiffin was tampering. Now, remember, there's a difference between sort of the legal tampering, as we call it, where a player's agent is maybe talking to a school and a coach talking directly with a player before they go in the portal. So all that to say, Ole Miss is sitting here going, okay, in their minds, they're thinking, these LSU coaches are tampering with our players. Now, they're helping you win, but they're tampering with our players, and they're in our building. The other part of this is if you're Ole Miss, and you actually want to allege that LSU is tampering with your roster and trying to recruit your players, yet you've opened your facility for these coaches to be in while they're employed by LSU, to be in your facility with your players coaching your teams. Well, like that, I mean, you're inviting the fox into the hen house. Is it like you're asking for it almost? So how can you allege tampering, yet you are inviting these coaches into your facility? So for all of these reasons, it's gotten very complicated right now on both sides. LSU wants their coaches, but Ole Miss doesn't want LSU tampering and also doesn't want the appearances that they're allowing this tampering allegedly to go on. So there's that. But the conundrum is Ole Miss wants to win. They're in the national semifinal. And having Charlie Weis and these coaches there is a big deal. Now, the other part of this that I mentioned, there's another part is, of those 6 coaches, I'm told 3 of them still desperately want to coach, and are adamant they want to coach and see this thing through with Ole Miss. And one of them is Charlie Weis Jr. And Charlie Weis Jr. was one of the coaches that had cold feet initially when Lane Kiffin got hired. When Lane Kiffin got hired and they got on the plane that Sunday and he said, if you're not on the plane, you're not coming with me. Well, Charlie Weis was one that needed some convincing. I know that there have been multiple reports that Charlie Weis got on a call with his father for an extended period of time. Charlie Weis, the former Notre Dame coach, former Patriots offensive coordinator, who convinced him to take the LSU job. Remember also, LSU's initial term sheet with Charlie Weis was 3 years, $6 million. They bumped it to 3 years, $7.5 million. And LSU also in that contract has a buyout clause whereby if Charlie Weis were to leave LSU, so a lot of people have asked, would he leave? No, and this is why. In his contract with LSU, there's a buyout clause where if Charlie Weis leaves LSU before April the 1st of this year, April 1st of 2026, he would owe 300% of his salary. Well, the annual salary is 2.5, which means he would owe $7.5 million to LSU if he leaves before April 1st. And remember, Pete Golding has already hired Baker as John David Baker as the new offensive coordinator. So Ole Miss has a full-time OC. Charlie Weis has a giant buyout if he were to leave LSU before April 1st. He's not going anywhere. He's certainly not going back to Ole Miss, but he wants to coach this thing through the college football playoff championship. So I could see a scenario where Charlie Weis, where the rest of the coaches, and this hasn't been determined yet, but I could see a scenario where the rest of these coaches stay at LSU. They don't keep going back. They're done. But Charlie Weis does to go coach the offense. Now, if you end up seeing a few stay in Baton Rouge and a few go back, that'll be the telltale of what I'm telling you here, of the coaches that are adamant that they want to coach Ole Miss throughout the duration of this college football playoff run. And so this is a decision that I don't know that Lane Kiffin is going to make it. I don't think that Lane Kiffin necessarily is going to tell these coaches, you can't go back. I think this is more likely going to come from the Ole Miss side of things. And maybe it is expressed, maybe how they express it publicly is that it'll be a mutually agreed upon thing or however it may be. But so much of what's happened right now with LSU, Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss has been posturing. This has been so much of this has been I'm trying to use more words carefully and not curse, but a measuring contest. They're all just they're slinging mud. They're trying to embarrass each other. And certainly Ole Miss is trying to embarrass Lane Kiffin in every way they possibly can. And I think Kiffin is out to prove and try to get as many players from Ole Miss as he can. We've talked about it publicly here. A lot of the conversations they've already had with agents for deals of current Ole Miss players. I've told you the names. It's Chambliss and Lacey and Watkins and Alexander. I mean, Carniero, the place kicker, is one that they were talking to his agent about bringing him over. And it sounds like Ole Miss has maybe matched that money, so they're not ultimately going to get him. I mean, all these deals, like we're going to talk about this in a second, but transfer portal window opened, and you see so many players enter with a do not contact tag. That means they've already got their list done because all these conversations have been had. And yes, these conversations have been had with LSU players maybe going to Ole Miss and Ole Miss players following Lane Kiffin to LSU. But in theory, it should all be done with agents talking to the schools and not the players. What comes of all that, I don't know. But the thing that's most interesting here is, as we head into this weekend, Ole Miss is turning the page to Miami and the college football playoff national semifinal. And they got to start getting ready for game prep for a game on Thursday to punch their ticket to the national championship game. So this isn't a thing that's going to linger. If those coaches are going back, they're going back this weekend to Oxford. So we'll know in very short order which of these LSU coaches will continue to coach Ole Miss through the duration of the college football playoff and which ones are going to be permanently now in Baton Rouge and not going back to Oxford. For LSU, and this isn't locked on Ole Miss, this is locked on LSU, and that's our main concern. And so much of these conversations are interwoven right now with the two programs for obvious reasons. But for LSU, I mean, everything that Lane Kiffin has said since he's been hired has been building toward January 2nd and the start of the portal. And he needs his staff ready to go because the success of the 2026 season is going to be on the backs of this transfer portal class. And so they need these coaches there ready to recruit for LSU and not working for Ole Miss. And I think Lane Kiffin knows it, and everybody has reached sort of that point, that breaking point right now. So that's going to reach some resolution this weekend. When we have an answer, we'll certainly talk about it right here on Locked on LSU. So the portal is open. What did we learn after day one? We'll get to that here, Locked on LSU, your team every day. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life. It doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rougiette Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rougiette Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body, so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. Rougiette Ready combines 3 clinically proven ingredients in 1 mint that dissolves under your tongue so it absorbs fast. You connect with a board-certified doctor online, by the way, and everything ships discreetly to your door. It's easy to understand why more than 150,000 men have already made the switch. If you've been thinking about taking that next step, now is the time. Head to rugiet.com/lockedoncollege. That's RUGIET.com/lockedoncollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Rugiet ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. And we're also brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making it even better. Every Friday night before the game tips off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So the first 24 hours of the transfer portal is coming to a close. And Friday did see another scholarship LSU football player announce his intention to enter the transfer portal. So the most notable one would be wide receiver Destin Hill. Now, I know that as we've talked about the receiver position, and we get to quarterbacks here in a second, by the way, because I know that's what everybody wants to hear about. But when you look at the receivers now with, Kyle Parker, Kylan Billiot, Jelani Watkins, now Destin Hill, you're losing Aaron Anderson and Xavier Thomas and Barian Brown out of the draft. That is going to be a complete overhaul of the receiver room. Now, Destin Hill was interesting, of course. He was a highly rated guy out of New Orleans. Ended up missing a few years of college football, ending up at Florida State, transferred to LSU this year. And unfortunately, the former Ed Nakar standout ended up with an injury early in fall camp, or actually in the season opener against Clemson, which kind of cost him the early part of his season. So that's unfortunate. And hopefully for Destin Hill, he'll find a landing spot. But it's important to remember, as I've said over and over again, Lane Kiffin has his targets at receiver. So I'm just going to challenge you. Before you melt over all the receivers they're losing, I'm just telling you, take a breath, pause, and let's see what it looks like when the portal cycle ends. Because when the portal cycle ends and you can take account of what LSU's receiver room looks like, then you can compare and contrast. For example, I've told you, Deuce Alexander, Winnie Watkins from Ole Miss are two guys that LSU is going to be targeting whenever those guys are able to enter the portal when Ole Miss's season ends. Also, NC State's wide receiver, Terrell Anderson, he's already lining up visits, and he's got a visit lined up to LSU. 39 catches, 629 yards, 5 touchdowns this season, and he's going to be visiting LSU. So there's another elite level receiver out of UAB who's hit the transfer portal. That's going to be a highly sought after guy that he's going to be taking a visit to LSU. The point being, Lane Kiffin knows what he's looking for, and they're going to make over that wide receiver room via the transfer portal. So before you freak out about who they've lost, let's wait and see the other side of the coin. Say, okay, here you lost all your numbers, but who were you able to add to replenish that room? And then we'll judge what that receiver room looks like at that point. Now, quarterback is going to be the most interesting. Obviously, that's the first domino that's got to fall. And we've talked about it plenty here. And I did a full episode previously on the quarterback targets to know and before the portal opened. And the one, of course, that we've talked about the most is Trinidad Chambliss. Now, every conversation I have with folks at Ole Miss, they believe Chambliss is not going to get his waiver approved. They seem almost confident, almost like they already know the result, even though that hasn't formally been said. So if Chambliss doesn't get his waiver approved, then his opportunity to play for a 6 year is going to have to go through legal means, almost like Diego Pavia did, right? When he went to court to get an extra year of eligibility, and he won because everybody wins against the NCAA. So Chambliss, it feels like, will have to go to court to get an extra year of eligibility. I've told you the offer. It's approaching $4 million, and that's pretty much market value for a starting quarterback. And if you can get Trinidad Chambliss at $24 24 years old. He's 23 right now. You give him 24 years old as a sixth-year college football player coming off this playoff run with Ole Miss for a year. You take him? Of course you do, for 3.85. After Chambliss, the name that we heard that's going to be visiting is Brendan Sorsby. So again, Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati. This is one of the guys that I told you in our episode to keep an eye on when we talked about all the quarterbacks. So Brendan Sorsby started his career, incidentally, playing for the Indiana Hoosiers, was at IU in 2022 and 2023, played in 11 games, started 7 times in 2023, transfers to Cincinnati in 2024. Over the last 2 seasons, he started all 24 games in which he's played. He's thrown for almost exactly on the number, 2,800 yards in 24, 2,800 yards in 25. This year, he went from 18 touchdowns to 27. His interceptions went from 7 to 5. So this year, 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Also rushing the football, 580 yards, averaging nearly 6 yards a carry, 9 rushing touchdowns. So you were talking about an experienced dude, 4 years of college experience with 1 year left to play, with dynamic running ability and a very effective, efficient passer. So Sorsby he's visiting Texas Tech and then coming to LSU. The other name that a lot of people were interested in was Sam Levitt. Now, Sam Levitt entered the transfer portal with a do not contact tag. Remember, if you go in the portal with a do not contact tag, that means you're telling schools, don't contact me, which means where we started. The legal tampering has already happened. Sam Levitt's already gone through the whole process of having his representatives vet what opportunities out there for schools, so he knows what his list is going to be. And Sam Levitt is going to be taking a visit to Ole Miss. Now, this is interesting because Ole Miss is very clearly, think about what I just said, preparing for the possibility and the likelihood of Chambliss not being back, not getting the waiver, and even if he does, not being back at Ole Miss. Now, Austin Simmons is there, and I told you that Ole Miss had shifted its focus to trying to focus on Austin Simmons. Well, today, on Friday, Austin Simmons went in the transfer portal, and he's set to visit Missouri. So he may well be staying in the SEC going to Missouri, which means Ole Miss and Simmons weren't able to reach an agreement. He's likely going to end up elsewhere. Ole Miss pivoted, and Sam Levitt could very well be at the top of their list as you look at how some of these dominoes are going to fall. Some of the other things I can tell you, it has been very apparent to me that LSU, and this should be obvious, they're going to go very heavy in the not only at receiver, but at offensive line. Quarterback, offensive line will be some of the premier targets. And I've told you before, 2 guards and 1 starting tackle. Expect at least 3 starters, 2 guards, 1 tackle out of the transfer portal. And another player that is really worth keeping an eye on the defensive side of the ball is Chaz Coleman. So Chaz Coleman from Penn State is an absolute freak. He's a defensive end from Penn State, 6'4", 246, played his true freshman season this year at Penn State in 2025. And that's a guy with incredible upside that is going to be among the top transfer defenders in the portal. So this is a guy who, if you look at the stats this year, not overwhelming, but a guy who was a highly regarded guy coming out of high school and is going to play a pretty significant role in this portal cycle. This year at Penn State, he played he played in season was limited, 1, 2, 3. He only played in 5 games due to injury. So that's why some of the productivity was limited. But keep an eye on Chaz Coleman. I'm scrolling through my notes to make sure there's nothing else that I have to tell you. But those are some of the first notes. Oh, the one other thing I forgot to tell you is that James Craig was in the building as well. All the assistants that I told you from Ole Miss that came over, James Craig in the building as well on Friday after he was there with Ole Miss at the Sugar Bowl on Thursday and was part of the contingent that was with LSU in Baton Rouge at football ops on Friday as the portal opened. Okay, that's my notebook. That's what I have for you right now. As all of this develops, we'll certainly keep you up to date. So if you are new, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. Be sure to let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We've got you every single day. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day.